Welcome to Off the Wall. My name is Trey. Thank you so much for joining me today. Come get settled in, get cozy, get nice and comfy. We've got a lot of info to get through. The IFL had their first full slate of games this past weekend, meaning all 16 teams were in action for the first time this season. So we've got 8 games to dive into. We had a couple undefeated teams suffer their first defeat this season over this past weekend. So we'll dive into that. And then this upcoming weekend, we've got the debut of AFL 3.0. So we'll preview some of those games as well as the IFL games that we got on the docket. So we've got a ton to get into. But before we do that, please give us a follow on all of the socials that we have: Instagram, Twitter/X, and TikTok. You can find us on there on each of those at Off the Wall FB, Off the Wall FB, F as in foot, B as in ball. Give us a follow on there. Pumping out lots of fun content on there. Going to be experimenting with different types of things moving forward, doing some collaborations with some folks. So it's going to be a super exciting time. So please hop on now. And if you're listening to us on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, please, I think it's a thumbs up, like, review. I think that's the process for that. Please give us a rating, preferably a good one, but hey, do you? And if you're watching us on YouTube, please like, subscribe, all that stuff that you hear everyone say. It helps the channel somehow. Not 100% sure how that works yet, but all those other people can't be wrong. So please do all that fun stuff so that we can continue to build on what we're doing. So every like, every review, every share, every subscribe, all that stuff helps. So happy to have you on board and along for the ride, especially as we get into the meat of indoor and arena season this upcoming weekend and for the months ahead. So let's dive into this past weekend of the IFL. The first game we're going to dive into was the Tucson Sugar Skulls at the San Antonio Gunslingers. This game took place last Thursday and was the first game of the weekend. And San Antonio walked away with their first win of the season. And it was a decisive one, 60-36, 60-36. San Antonio's league leading offense, they came to play again this week, but as we've learned in past episodes, their offense has never been the problem. Their defense has been the big question mark, and they made some adjustments this week that seem to have worked out. They held Tucson to only 36 points, but there is a pretty big asterisk on that 36 number. Tucson was without their starting quarterback and on a short week. So playing a team with a different quarterback than usual on a short week, I would hope that the defense would come to play and show up in that situation. But you still got to give it to San Antonio. It was a drastic improvement to what they've shown over the first couple weeks of the season. But given the circumstances, you kind of got to take it with a grain of salt. But on offense, Sam Castronova, he lit it up again. He had 7 passing touchdowns to 5 different receivers. They even got the running game going with Keyshawn Harper in the backfield. I would like to see them be a little bit more balanced in terms of pass to run, specifically in the running game with people not named Sam Castronova, because it is a long season. You don't want him taking too many hits too early in the year. But besides that, they took a giant step in the right direction, San Antonio did, and this was their best outing of the season by far as a well-rounded product. So if you're a San Antonio fan, you have to be happy with what you saw this past Thursday. On the other side, you can't beat up on Tucson too much given the circumstances. Again, a short week, having to start a backup quarterback that hasn't gotten the reps with the offense so far this season. The starting quarterback, Malik Mitchell, they held him out due to a minor injury, just due to the longevity of the season, wanted to play it safe, and you could tell that something was off and something was missing the entire game. So you can't beat them up too bad, but what you can hold them to is how they ran their offense given the circumstances. So 23 total rushing attempts on offense, that's fine. That's Tucson's identity. But 17 of them were coming from the interim starting quarterback, Torrance Gibson. And when you have a running back the caliber of Mike Jones in the backfield for Tucson, and he's only getting 4 carries in the game, when your starting quarterback is not in the game, that's not a recipe for success. You are already in an uphill battle from the beginning without your starting quarterback, and then you're not feeding the consistent weapon that you do have on offense and is one of the best running backs in the entire league. it just didn't make a ton of sense. They had trouble throwing the ball. Completion percentage wasn't great. It was an uphill battle the entire time, and they just weren't doing themselves any favors. So I would have liked to have seen Mike Jones be the bell cow back in this game and really feed him the ball. But hopefully Malik Mitchell will be healthy and start these upcoming games, and Tucson will be able to get back on track. Next game we're going to talk about is the Sioux Falls Storm at the Green Bay Blizzard, and Green Bay walked away with a 48-35 victory. And we'll start with Sioux Falls here. I think last week we talked about them needing to get out of their own way, and their offensive line is their own worst enemy, specifically at center. They had multiple turnovers due to the center just snapping the ball and quite bluntly hitting himself in the crotch with the ball on the snap while the quarterback was in a shotgun. So it needed to go back 5 yards. He was hiking it back as if the quarterback was right behind him, and that those turnovers changed a lot of momentum in the game. And Sioux Falls was, again, you want to talk about an uphill battle. They were swimming upstream, not even an uphill battle, swimming upstream the entire game. And these turnovers were like throwing an anchor to them while they're struggling to keep up. So it was a really rough look, and they just couldn't get out of their own way. And the fact that it was only a 13-point game, despite some of those things, it's like, man, Sioux Falls, you're so close. You're so close, but you're 0-4, and you could very easily be 2-2 if you had gotten out of your way at any point over these first four games and you were able to do some of these fundamental things right. But the good news for Sioux Falls is that their quarterback from the past few years that they won several championships with, Lorenzo Brown Jr., re-signed with the team shortly before the game last week. So we could expect to see him in the starting lineup, maybe not this next week, but maybe the week after. So things might be changing here in Sioux Falls soon, and it couldn't come at a better time just because they're in crisis mode right now, 0-4 for the first time in team history. Something had to change. I wouldn't be surprised to see offensive line get shuffled up. At center, they had a defensive lineman come in and start snapping it just because they needed something to change. So Sioux Falls is in a tough spot, but we'll see what happens with Lorenzo Brown when he gets into the starting lineup at some point. And on the other side, Green Bay keeps doing Green Bay things. I talked about it in past episodes where Green Bay kind of plays a boring brand of football, 3-4 yards in a cloud of dust, but that defense is ferocious. That defensive line, we've talked about them on Instagram and Twitter before, and they are unbelievable. Like they were just so disruptive all throughout the game, providing pressure from every angle. Every player on the line was just terrorizing the offensive line for Sioux Falls, and they made tons of plays late in the game to hold on to the lead and secure the victory. So Green Bay sitting at 3-1, and the only loss is to the Massachusetts Pirates, who they quite frankly should have beat in week one. So Green Bay could hypothetically be sitting at 4-0, and offensively they're looking a little bit better each week. Max Mailer came back, I should say. I think he had 6 total touchdowns through the air and the ground combined. So he got right back into form. I'm still not totally bought into Green Bay until I see them do this against a team like Frisco, or like totally dominate against a Massachusetts, like a team like Massachusetts. But they continue to pick up wins when they need to against these, I don't want to say lesser opponents, but teams that aren't doing so hot continue to stack the wins, and they're on the path to make the playoffs. And with the defense that they have, you're saying defense wins championships, that could come into play, and Green Bay could potentially make a run. So ugly Big Ten football is ever so present in the state of Wisconsin, but Green Bay is looking really good. The next game we're going to get into is the Massachusetts Pirates at the Quad City Steamwheelers, and Quad City pull off the upset, winning this game 54-43. So Quad City came in as 9.5-point underdogs at home and ended up with a 11-point victory. So a crazy swing there in terms of the betting odds before the game to the actual result. Quad City, they got out of their own way. They looked very efficient. They looked really good. We talked before about, look, get out of your own way. Stop dropping these easy passes. Like, do the easy things good, and good things will happen. And that's what they did. They look smooth. They minimized the amount of self-inflicted wounds that they had all throughout the game. And for the first time this season, they scored not just above 40 points, but they scored above 50 points for the first time. They had scored in the 20s and 30s in the 3 games leading up to this. So the fact that they were able to post a 50 burger in this game in particular, this was their best game of the season by far. And the fact that they did it against the undefeated 4-0 Massachusetts Pirates, who were previously at the top of the Eastern Conference, pretty good. That's what you want to see from a team like Quad City, who's looking to get back on track, and they are definitely on track. Quarterback Judd Erickson looked much better in this game, both on the air or in the air and on the ground, and they were able to spread the ball amongst the playmakers on offense. Jared Harrington, the wide receiver, number 16, they got him 9 to 10 touches on offense, both through handoffs and through short little passes, just to get him involved. PJ Vander popped off for 92 yards and 3 touchdowns on the ground. This is the Quad City team that we were expecting early on, and they could be turning a corner here. And I also want to give a big shout out to going back to quarterback Judd Erickson. He had a very, very nice run on a triple option where faked it to the running back, faked a pitch, defense bit, and he cruised up the field for, I think it was like a 15, 20-yard touchdown. So he looked like a very different quarterback than what we saw from the first couple of games, and it seems like he's settling into the starting role pretty nicely. On the other side, Massachusetts kind of came crashing back down to earth a little bit after their 4-0 start. They didn't really have a air quote perfect game played so far. They kind of did enough to win in the majority of their games early on, while their game against Iowa last week was the only game where they pretty much dominated it from start to finish. So they've started slow on offense in a ton of games this year, and that's what happened this game. And in the previous games, their defense was able to keep them in it by limiting the opportunities of the opposing team. But in this game, Quad City stomped on the gas early and they didn't let up. So Massachusetts, they were having to fight from behind the entire game, and the defense was doing all that they could. But Quad City had things clicking. They were taking advantage of some miscommunications on defense, some poor plays, if we're just being honest, from the Massachusetts defense that they hadn't done over the first couple weeks of the season. Um, yeah, so the Pirates, they got to get off to a quicker start over the next couple of weeks, especially if they want to rebound from this, and as they go through the Eastern Conference and start to face some teams from the West as well. So this was definitely a letdown game for the Pirates, and they have the talent and the depth to bounce back and stay strong. I have no doubt in my mind that they'll continue their pace to be a playoff team, but they got to get started better in the games ahead, and they gotta help the offense has to help their defense out, especially in the first half of games, so that the defense can pin their ears back and be opportunistic and create some turnovers with the pass rush like they did last week against Iowa against the other teams moving forward. So no reason to panic in Massachusetts just yet. They were going to drop a couple games, but to drop it to Quad City the way they did, you just got to tip the cap to Quad City for one hell of a game. Next game we're going to get into is the Vegas Nighthawks at the Jacksonville Sharks. So Vegas came into Jacksonville and frankly put a beat down on the Sharks, winning 61-35. And we'll start with Jacksonville. Well, actually, before we start with Jacksonville, this game was extremely chippy. There were lots of unsportsmanlike penalties. I think there were a couple ejections in the game. Yeah, there were a couple ejections in the game due to fighting right before halftime. Lots of personal fouls back and forth. Lots of John. I think every player on the Vegas offense at one point had an unsportsmanlike penalty just because they were letting Jacksonville have it. There may be some bad blood from their game earlier in the season in Vegas, where Vegas was able to walk away with a victory there. Yeah, this was an extremely chippy game. So if you're going to go back and rewatch a game, you might want to rewatch this one, because the home atmosphere was electric for Jacksonville. It always is, and Vegas was lighting it up, and it was an interesting dynamic between two teams that aren't even in the same conference and have only played each other twice in the history of each team, and that both have happened in the past couple of weeks. there's bad blood there. So I don't think they'll play each other. The only chance they have to play each other again is if they meet in the national championship, which probably isn't going to happen. So it'll be interesting to see how this unfolds in the offseason and if they play again next season. But good news for Jacksonville is that they started to gain some momentum in the first half, and they were going neck and neck with Vegas there for a little bit. On offense, they have a new quarterback and a new running back. Fred Payton Jr. at quarterback, and then running back Boom Williams. They both looked really good in the first half. Peyton looked a little green, but that's to be expected when you have somebody starting in the IFL for the very first time and starting in any indoor or arena game for the very first time. They're going to be a little bit green, but his first pass that he completed or even attempted was a touchdown. So that's got to be a good omen for the Sharks moving forward. And this offense just looked a lot better with him in control of it. So he's only going to get better week after week. And the second half, they just kind of melted and dissolved, and the offense really couldn't do much. And Vegas just kept going. But this was a step in the right direction, despite what the scoreboard says. Was it a big loss? Yes. But were there positives to take away from this for Jacksonville? Also, yes. Um, I like where they're headed, but it may still be a couple weeks before we see Jacksonville get in the wins, get in the W column. On the other side, Jerome Johnson, man, he did his thing again. Last week, he had 7 total touchdowns. He was the player of the week. So how do you follow that? Naturally, you just score 7 touchdowns again. That seems like something that most teams and most players should try to do. So a little life hack for all the other teams and players out there. But the Vegas offense looked even better than last week, despite not scoring as many points. Antonio Wimbush at running back got a lot more involved on the ground. He had 9 carries for 73 yards and 2 touchdowns. Just a crazy efficiency on the ground. Johnson was efficient through the air. He went 12 for 14 for 184 yards and 5 touchdowns. And especially the deep ball. The deep ball, man, he connected with his receivers multiple times for 30, 35, 40 plus yard gains to either score or put them in the red zone to punch it in. The deep ball, that this kept Jacksonville on their toes all throughout the game, and they were so worried about getting beat deep that, oh yeah, Jerome Johnson pretty good at running the ball as well. So this was a super complimentary game by Vegas's offense, and they just executed their game plan perfectly. If Vegas maintains this pace, we are going to be in for some instant classic matchups over the next couple of weeks in the Western Conference. So take a look at the schedule. You'll probably know what games I'm talking about. We're talking about the Bay Area Panthers versus Vegas Nighthawks. We're talking about Vegas at San Diego Strike Force. We're going to be in for some very, very fun games ahead. Next up, we've got the Arizona Rattlers at the Iowa Barnstormers. And in this game, Arizona held on to win 49-47 in Iowa. We'll start with Iowa here. Iowa, thank you. Thank you for heeding the advice from last week's episode. I know we had a little moment where we had everyone who wasn't in Des Moines or in the state of Iowa take a few steps away, and we had a little talk. Thank you for listening. Kyle King is the quarterback that Iowa needs moving forward. The offense looked night and day better with Kyle King in the starting quarterback role from the beginning of the game until the end of the game. Still had his moments where it was like, oh, what are you doing, man? But overall, on the ground, through the air, he was getting it done, and he is a better fit for this offense going forward. And I'm glad to see it, because it was painful watching Iowa play. The completion percentage on paper for Kyle King wasn't great. He went 13 for 30 passing, so that wasn't ideal, but they were behind for the majority of the game and managed to mount a pretty good comeback. And you could tell, only losing by 2, they were down 20 plus points at one point. So they came storming back and nearly pulled it off. But I would like to see Iowa find more ways to get the ball out of his hands quicker. Arizona was able to torch Iowa on some screen plays, running back screens, wide receiver screens that went all the way for touchdowns. I would like to see Iowa implement more of those things and get a little bit more creative, and not have Kyle King. That's just a fun name to say out loud. Kyle King, not have him have to chuck it downfield for the entire game. and get off to a little bit better of a start. Because if they can start the first half the way that they ended this game, I was going to start stacking up some W's here soon. But that's if they can start well and really get things going early on. On the other side, Arizona got the win, but man, they are going to be in trouble in the Western Conference because they had a chance to bounce back and get back into form against the last place team in the Eastern Conference, and they nearly let them come back and win this game. One or two plays goes a little bit differently, and Iowa wins this game, and it's an impressive comeback. So Arizona, man, they're going to be in trouble in the West moving forward because of teams like we just talked about. Because of teams like Vegas, Vegas is a wagon right now. San Diego, Bay Area, these teams are extremely good, and Arizona is just held together by pins and needles at this point. I don't know. Is that a right saying? I don't know. You get what I'm trying to say. But they've also had a rough go of injuries with quarterback Dalton Sneed getting hurt in the very first game of the year. Dylan Winfrey on the defensive side of the ball. He's one of the primary playmakers in the defensive backfield. He's been hurt. Isaiah Houston has been hurt. They're all missing time. So optimistically, if they all come back, maybe they can start stringing together some wins and getting back on track. But as it stands now, with the way the rest of the West is playing out, they're going to be in a lot of trouble, and we're not used to seeing Arizona like this. Next game we've got is the Frisco Fighters at the Tulsa Oilers, and Frisco came into Tulsa, smacked around the Oilers, won 60-32 in the Red River Rumble. Second time this year that Frisco was able to top Tulsa. And over the past couple weeks, I've been giving Frisco their flowers. They're undefeated. They look really, really good. But I did so with a little teeny tiny asterisk. And that was I wanted to see them win a game by impactfully and efficiently passing the ball. They were winning their first couple of games by just being a powerhouse run team, which is great. Win by any means. A win is a win. They all count the same. But I wanted to see them do it through the air and really pick apart a team with their passing attack. And they did that against Tulsa. So they shut me up. Frisco is by far the best team in the Eastern Conference, and they're making a case for being the best team in the entire league. Wide receivers Devin McCoy and Cole Blackman, they've grown into one hell of a wide receiver duo for the Fighters, and they're making a case for being one of the better duos, not just in the Eastern Conference, but in the league as well. They're making deep catches. They're making plays after, like they're getting plenty of yak yards after catch. They're doing it all through the passing attack, and they're only getting better. So Frisco, man, I'm having a hard time pointing to a weakness at this point, just because on offense they're clicking, and on defense they were forcing lots of turnovers against Tulsa. They made Tulsa uncomfortable all throughout the game. Frisco just looks unbelievable. On the other side, Tulsa has some growing up to do. If we're just being honest, they absolutely melted down on defense in the third quarter. Going into halftime, they were down 40-10. Not great. You don't want to be going into halftime down 40-10, but they managed to mount a little bit of a comeback. At some point in the third quarter, it was 40-25. And so there was a little bit of energy in the air, like, okay, get one stop and things could get very, very interesting. But they just had a drive in the third quarter where they had multiple unsportsmanlike penalties called against them. They had a player ejected on the drive. And guess what? Frisco doesn't need help driving down the field. They got that. They're good. You don't need to help them with stupid penalties. But Tulsa just melted down, and what could have been an opportunity to keep the game close and fight and claw back into it, Frisco scored on that drive and just blew the doors open, and it quickly became a three-score game again. Yeah, it was just tough to watch because it was a and like it was a rivalry game where kind of similar to what Vegas and Jacksonville went through. They already played each other, so they probably had some hurt feelings and bad blood carrying over from that first game, and Tulsa just let it get the best of them, and this meltdown ultimately was the final nail in the coffin on their comeback attempt. And we've seen what Tulsa can be when things are going really, really well. Last week against Sioux Falls, but this game showed what they can be at their worst. So it's lots of ups and downs with Tulsa, and they'll look to bounce back next week against Quad City, but Quad City's on the come up, as we talked about a little bit earlier. So Tulsa, they were at an all-time high last week, and you can't help but feel like they're at an all-time low right now. Next up, we've got the Duke City Gladiators at the Northern Arizona Wranglers, and Northern Arizona walked away with a 39-23 victory here. One of the lowest scoring games of the season so far, and honestly, one of the ugliest. Like this was a tough watch, especially compared to some of the games that were happening right around the same time, or games that started right before it. This was a tough watch. And if you were only watching this game and you weren't watching San Diego Bay Area, or you weren't watching Frisco, Tulsa, like these other games were much more entertaining, just because this was tough. And part of the reason why it was tough to watch was because of Duke City's offense. They had two different quarterbacks in the game who went a combined 4 for 15 passing, with 3 interceptions. They could not get anything going. The strength of the Duke City offense is their wide receiver group, and they just could not connect and get the ball in their hands for them to make plays. They pivoted from their starting quarterback from the first couple of games, and they eventually gave the ball to Jeremy Hickbottom as their primary quarterback in this game, and he did okay running the ball. But passing the ball, man, you got to play to your strengths if you're Duke City, and they just could not get the ball to their stars like Journey Sloan in the wide receiver group, or Jeff Carr. They could not get the ball in their hands to let them work, and it was just a tough go. And I feel really bad for Duke City's defense, because Duke City has a very good defense, all things considered. They get put in a bad situation more times than not, given how their offense has struggled over the first quarter of the season. So to hold Northern Arizona to only 39 sounds fine to say out loud, but considering how Northern Arizona has played the past couple of weeks, only 39 is pretty good. Like that's a victory. So Duke City, they got to get their offense figured out. They got to do it quick. They're sinking very quickly in a very tough Western Conference, and if they want any chance to sniff the postseason, to sniff a chance at the playoff, they have to get it done now. And on the opposite side, this was a tough game for Northern Arizona, but a win is a win. They all count the same, right? So Joshua Jones had 4 touchdown passes on the day. He did have a couple of interceptions. They focused a lot on running the ball because they had a sizable lead that felt insurmountable for the majority of the game, just due to how poorly Duke City's offense was playing. So I think it was something where they were comfortable with their lead and just running out the clock and getting out of there with a W, and improving to 4-1 on the year. So man, Northern Arizona, they looked pretty good in weeks past. This was a rough one, but Duke City's defense is a lot better than they're getting credit for, just due to the situation that they're in. So Northern Arizona, you got to be happy with a win here, but you got to get a little bit better production out of your offense over the weeks ahead, especially, and again, this tough Western Conference. Last but not least, we have the San Diego Strike Force at the Bay Area Panthers, and Bay Area walked away with a 53-50 win in this battle of the undefeateds, and this game was a certified banger. This was a very good game. If you're going to go back and watch any game from this weekend, it's got to be this one. Both teams started a little sloppy on offense. The defenses really stepped it up in the first half, but the second half was an absolute thrill ride. And the best part about this is that we get a rematch next week. This matchup had San Diego going to Bay Area. Next week, Bay Area goes to San Diego. So not to get too far ahead of ourselves, but that game next week is going to be very good as well. But talking about this one, on paper, this was supposed to be a battle of two quarterbacks that are the very best in the league, between San Diego's Nate Davis and Bay Area's Daquan Neal. Unfortunately, both of them have picked up injuries over the first quarter of the season, so both of them did not start. Nate Davis allegedly has broken ribs that prevented him from starting this game, and then Daquan Neal, I think they said on the broadcast that he had a quad contusion, which sounds awful. So he dressed, but I think as a like emergency quarterback situation. So Felix Harper got the start for Bay Area, and Rudy Johnson got the start for San Diego. And San Diego started pretty rough on offense. A couple of turnovers led to it led directly to Bay Area scores, as in Bay Area recovered a fumble for a score, Bay Area returned an interception for a score. So San Diego's defense was doing what they needed to do to make some stops to the Bay Area offense, but San Diego's offense couldn't capitalize. So midway through the second quarter, Nate Davis came into the game, and at this point, Bay Area was up by, I think, 15, and Nate Davis just picked them apart and got San Diego back in the game and got them to lead late in the fourth quarter. And it was great. It was such a thrilling game to watch, and they very nearly pulled off the comeback attempt. 13, I think, yeah, 13 seconds left. Nate Davis attempted a pass all the way downfield that was very nearly caught. And if it would have been caught, it would have been down to the 2-yard line with 3 seconds left to either go for the touchdown or kick the game tying field goal. Ultimately ended up missing the long field goal to end the game. But man, that game really impressed me. Even though San Diego lost, it really impressed me because when fully healthy, San Diego can take out any team in the league. And if next week they're at full strength, Bay Area better be on high alert. And honestly, the same thing can be said about Bay Area. They've shown a lot of resilience. They didn't have their starting quarterback. They didn't have their starting running back in this game either. But they reach into their repertoire. They have that next man up mentality, and they figure out ways to get wins. And that's a credit to their team, and that's a credit to their coaching staff that they have there. Starting running back Shane Simpson, he couldn't go, so backup Stafford Anderson, hope I said that right, sorry Stafford, got the start next to his former college teammate Felix Harper. So interesting little story about them is that Felix Harper has been on the Bay Area team, and he told the coaching staff about this player that he played with, and he ended up getting signed, and they ended up starting and playing this game together. So what a cool story that is. But the duo combined for 32 rushing attempts, and they got 72 yards on those rushing attempts. So not a great average on the attempts, but they got 4 touchdowns, and that's the most important part. They did just enough to hold on while San Diego was making this comeback attempt, and they ended up driving down the field and scoring with less than a minute to go ahead and get the win. So this game earned the off the wall certified banger badge. Only 3 of them so far this year. So if you want to see what the other 2 were, go to offthewallfb.com to see what some of those other games were, because not every game is a certified banger. Oh, people think every game's a banger. No. Certified bangers, there is a process that these have to go through, and this matched all the criteria to be considered a certified banger. So this game was very, very good, and I can't wait to see the matchup next week. A great week overall. Very, very fun highlights, very fun games to watch. But next week, we've got another full slate, and we're going to see more full slates with every team in action moving forward. And the first game of next weekend starts on Friday, and that's going to be between Iowa and Green Bay in Green Bay. Green Bay is for sure going to be favored in this game. If I had to put a point amount to it, I'd probably say Green Bay is going to be 8.5 to 9-point favorites at home, and this spread's probably going to be pretty low as well, probably in the 82.5 to 83 range. So I was going to have their hands full. Green Bay is 1 or 2 plays away from being undefeated, and defensively they look as good as ever, and they've just been dominating teams all season, and they've already beat Iowa before. Would not surprise me to see them put the beat down on them again. Also on Friday, we've got the San Antonio Gunslingers at the Frisco Fighters. And this is a game that has the potential to be the game of the week. An explosive San Antonio offense versus a defense in Frisco that hasn't had a really big test just yet. But the Frisco offense is probably going to decimate the San Antonio defense. So I would not be surprised to see this over-under in the 100s, probably like an over-under of 102.5, with Frisco being favored by 8.5, 9.5 as well. So this has the potential to be a very, very good game. And if Sam Casanova can continue his hot streak and San Antonio can do anything on defense to stop Frisco, San Antonio has the potential to put Frisco on upset watch. But nope, I'm not doubting Frisco anymore. Frisco's going to take care of business. Next up on Saturday, kicking off the Saturday games, is going to be Duke City at Vegas, and this game could not possibly be any more lopsided. Vegas is probably going to be 17, 18-point favorites. Like that sounds ridiculous, but that's how polar opposite these teams are. Duke City is in shambles on offense. Vegas might have the best offense in the league based on how Jerome Johnson has been playing. So this over-under is probably going to be probably like 90, 91.5, strictly because Vegas can put up 60. So Duke City's going to have their hands full. Their defense is really going to be tested, and they got to figure something out on offense quick because Vegas, they're going to come out swinging. And if Duke City doesn't answer with a counterpunch of their own, they're going to be in trouble early. Next up, we've got the Massachusetts Pirates going to Sioux Falls to face the Sioux Falls Storm. Massachusetts is going to be hoping to rebound off of their first loss of the season, while Sioux Falls is going to be looking for their first win of the season. So this line is interesting because I think it depends on who the starting quarterback for Sioux Falls will be. Lorenzo Brown has some experience this season, but he was playing for the Rattlers. He doesn't have any experience with this year's Sioux Falls team just yet. Sioux Falls supporting staff on offense in terms of their wide receivers and running back is very good. They just need elevated quarterback play. So if Lorenzo Brown gets the start, the spread in favor of Sioux Falls is a little more interesting to me. I think Massachusetts will definitely be favored in this game, probably by 8.5, 7.5 points, just because they're the road team and just because they got exposed a little bit last week. I would expect the total for this to also probably be in the high 80s, maybe like an 88.5, 89.5. Fully expect Massachusetts to go in and rebound and win this game. But Sioux Falls could potentially make it interesting depending on who's starting at quarterback. Next up, we've got the Northern Arizona Wranglers going to Tucson to take on the Tucson Sugar Skulls. And this is another game where it depends on who's starting at quarterback for the home team that will make or break this line and how people will choose it. Northern Arizona for sure is going to be the favorite just because they've looked great on offense so far throughout this season. And Tucson still looking to get a little bit more consistency. But if Malik Mitchell does indeed play, this game gets very, very interesting very, very quickly. So I think Northern Arizona is going to be at least 7.5, 7-point favorites heading into it with an over-under probably at 93.5, 94.5, somewhere around there. But if Malik Mitchell starts, might want to consider, I'm not saying take, might want to consider Tucson here in this home dog spot, but this will be a pretty good game as well. Then kicking off the Sunday games of the weekend, we've got Tulsa going to Quad City, where the Oilers are face off against the Steamwheelers. Quad City coming off of a big, big win at home against Massachusetts. Tulsa coming off of a letdown game against Frisco. I think Quad City is going to be favored here, probably by 3.5, 4 points, nothing too big. But the over-under here is probably going to be mid-80s, maybe low 80s, maybe like an 83.5. Tulsa still has a good defense, and they have an offense that can put up some points. But Quad City, they have a pretty good defense as well, based off how they were able to limit the Massachusetts Pirates and how they were able to score on their own. So if the total line here is in the mid-80s, I might consider taking the over. Then next up, we've got the Jacksonville Sharks going to the Arizona Rattlers. So some old AFL foes that faced off. I believe they faced off in an Arena Bowl back in the day. They faced off for the first time as IFL teams in the same league. And Jacksonville, it's a tough spot for Jacksonville, having to travel across the country to Arizona with a new quarterback, with a new running back. But if there is a team that they can get things right, it's against Arizona. We talked through that earlier. Iowa managed to work through some things and nearly pull off the comeback attempt against Arizona. Jacksonville could be in a similar spot this week. Arizona is definitely going to be favored here, probably 5.5, 6.5. But if Dalton Sneed is the starting quarterback this week, Arizona should definitely be able to pull off the win against Jacksonville. But it is an opportunity for Jacksonville to continue to get things right and to continue to figure things out on offense. And the total here, I would expect to probably be in the high 80s, maybe like an 88 and a half, 89 and a half. So yeah, this will be an interesting game to see how both teams kind of right their ship moving forward, because Arizona, they need this win badly to stay afloat in the Western Conference, and Jacksonville needs this win badly just to get their first win. So this will be an interesting one to watch. Last but not least, we've got the Bay Area Panthers going to San Diego to take on the San Diego Strike Force. San Diego has one of the best broadcasts of any IFL team, so this will feel like a primetime heavyweight matchup just based on the quality of the stream alone. So definitely recommend checking this one out. It depends on what the quarterback situation is. Like we talked about with the recap, if Nate Davis is starting at quarterback, which it looks like he will, I I feel like you got to take San Diego in the rematch here. I feel like San Diego is probably going to be favored by 2.5, 3.5 again, especially with them being the home team in the spot. But if Daquan Neal is the starting quarterback for Bay Area heading into this, that we could be in for another firework filled game. The over under here is probably going to be bumped up from what it was last week. I think last week it was like 90 and a half. It's probably going to be bumped up to 97 and a half, 98 and a half, just based off of how this past week's matchup went. So this is going to be probably one of the better games of the weekend, and has a potential to be certified banger part 2 for this matchup. And they play 2 more times later in the season. So 4 times total. The California Clash, or the Cali Clash, whatever they call it now, this is prime time must watch IFL. So that's a preview of IFL Week 7. It's going to be a good one. We're going to have some really good games. So super excited to watch along with those. But this upcoming weekend is going to be a big weekend for indoor and arena football, because we've got the IFL in midseason, but then we've also got the Arena Football League, AFL 3.0, depending on what you want to call it. It's their week 1 is this upcoming weekend. So it's a super exciting time in the indoor and arena football world. We're hoping for the best. Some of the things we've been seeing for some of the teams in the AFL over the past week or so haven't been too promising, but we'll dive into some of the games that are slated to take place on Saturday, April 27th and Sunday, April 28th, and give a little preview of it and what to expect. We've got 8 games taking place this upcoming weekend for AFL Week 1. All 16 teams will be in action. 6 games will take place on Saturday night, and 2 games will take place on Sunday. 3 of the games throughout the entire weekend will be on the NFL Network, which is absolutely huge for the redebut of the league, the rebirth. And the first game that will be on the NFL Network will be the Orlando Predators at the Albany Firebirds on Saturday night at 8 p.m. And then on Sunday, both games on Sunday will also be on the NFL Network. So Sunday, April 28th at 1 p.m., the Georgia Force at the West Texas Desert Hawks, and then the Southwest Kansas Storm at the Salina Liberty at 6 p.m. So we got a little bit of a double header there with a little bit of space in between, so you do some Sunday chores in between the games. But on Saturday, starting from the beginning, we've got the Philadelphia Soul at the Louisiana Voodoo. We've got the Wichita Regulators versus the Billings Outlaws. We've got the Orlando Predators at the Albany Firebirds. We've got the Iowa Rampage at the Rapid City Marshals. We've got the Minnesota Myth at the Nashville Cats. And we've got the Washington Wolfpack at the Oregon Black Bears. So there's a lot we don't know about a lot of these teams. Specifically for that first game, Philadelphia Soul at the Louisiana Voodoo. This past week, let's back up. All throughout this offseason, it's been an understanding that the Louisiana Voodoo would be playing in Lake Charles, Louisiana. In past iterations of the AFL, they were the New Orleans Voodoo, but Lake Charles is several hours away from New Orleans. So it's a legacy brand, but it's also not at the same time. But this past week, it was announced that the Louisiana Voodoo were moving from Lake Charles to Lafayette, which is about 90 minutes away. So a week before the season is set to kick off, a week before Louisiana is set to host their home opener, they move 90 miles away. Not great. Like, let's just call it how it is. Not great. I'm sure there's lots of behind the scenes stuff that nobody knows about or nobody wants to admit. The arena in Lake Charles is pointing the finger at the AFL and the ownership of the Voodoo. The ownership of the Voodoo and the AFL are pointing the finger at the arena, saying they're impossible to deal with. But the arena is saying the league didn't pay the rent that was due in the contract. So you don't pay the rent, you don't get to be a tenant. It's a mess already. We're not even in the season yet. So it's a little messy. That being the first game, it's a blessing for the league that that's not a game that's on NFL Network, and it was probably strategically done not to have it have it be that way. So Philadelphia and Louisiana, there's a lot we don't know about. So this is going to be a very exploratory game for both teams. Yeah, it's going to be an interesting one. But yeah, the fact that they moved venues 90 minutes away, moved cities 90 minutes away a week before kickoff, that's a little concerning. It is what it is. Next up, we've got the Wichita Regulators at the Billings Outlaws. Billings Outlaws played a preseason game against a local arena team near them, and they won 68 to nothing. Now, was that local arena team on the same caliber as them? Probably not, if we're just being honest, but it is promising to see that they already have some preseason reps and they've got some things under their belt. So um, I would expect Billings to put a little beat down on Wichita. It's for any of these games, you want to rely on experience in the coaching staff and experience as an organization. Those are the two things you really want to lean on in terms of figuring out who's going to be a good team starting off. Billings Outlaws, they've been around or they've been a team in some capacity for over 10 years. They took a little break in the middle there, but their coaching staff of Cedric Walker and Shedrick Bonner, they are two of the greatest AFL players of all time. So if they can have even half of their greatness that they had as players as a coaching staff, Billings is going to be a very tough team for any team in the league, let alone Wichita. So I expect Billings to probably get a big win to start off their AFL 3.0 campaign. Orlando versus Albany is by far the most intriguing matchup of the entire weekend, which is why it got the NFL Network spot. Albany has had multiple teams over the past couple of years. They had the Albany Empire in the AFL, and then the NAL came to a unceremonious end with the Antonio Brown saga that we can get into a little bit later. But Albany loves arena football. The city of Albany has supported arena football. You go back and watch some NAL, AFL games for the Albany Empire, and they know how to fill a stadium. They know how to fill an arena with fans that know the sport and love the sport. So I would expect this to be the most well-attended game of the entire weekend. I know the team over at Albany, not just on the field, but behind the scenes, has been busting their tail to make this as impactful and good as it can possibly be, especially for it being the debut on the NFL Network. Albany's probably gonna win this game. Predators do have Drew Powell, who was the quarterback for the Arizona Rattlers in the IFL for the past couple of seasons. So the Predators definitely can make it interesting. But if I were to take a pick heading into the season, again, you want to rely on experience as a coaching staff and as a culture. And I think Albany has that. Orlando has that to an extent with head coach EJ Burt, legendary Orlando Predators defensive lineman from the 2000s. But I think it's going to take a little bit more time for them to get into a rhythm with things, because Albany has brought back a lot of the players that they had on the Albany Empire from years past. So they already have that built-in continuity where it's going to be hard to beat them, let alone pick against them. Next up, we've got the Iowa Rampage at the Rapid City Marshals, and this is another one we don't know a ton about. Rapid City did play a preseason game. I believe it was last night. I should know the score off the top of my head, but it was like 70 something to 8 or 9 against a smaller arena team from the area. So another one where they got the reps, they got the opportunity to you know, run through plays, run through scenarios, do all these things. So if I had to lean on somebody, I'd probably lean on Rapid City here. Iowa had a head coaching change a couple months back, so the continuity in terms of when everything was announced in the fall of 24 and beyond that to now leans in favor of Rapid City. And honestly, for any of these games, I'm probably going to lean on the home team just because it's a lot to start a team from scratch or to have an expansion team at all, let alone do it on the road. So I think you're going to see a lot of home teams walk away victorious, but I think Rapid City will walk away with this one. I don't know what any of the betting lines for any of these will be, if they'll be offered at all. So it'll be a brand new experience for all of us. So maybe next week we'll have some betting lines to work with and some prior knowledge that we can build off of. Next up on Saturday, we've got the Minnesota Myth going to Nashville to face the Nashville Cats. And I really like the Nashville Cats roster that they've built up over this offseason. They have lots of IFL experienced on the roster, which is not exactly the same as the AFL, but it will certainly help. The transition from IFL to AFL is going to be a lot easier for those players than it is for some outdoor players that are transitioning to arena for the very first time. Their quarterback, Ramon Atkins, very, very good player, rookie of the year in the IFL a few years back. Their wide receivers, Marquise Irvin and Braxton Haley, are going to be a very, very good wide receiver combo for them. So I'm interested to see how some of these IFL players that used to only play one side of the ball transition to the Ironman game. That's going to be super interesting to watch, but this will be a pretty good game. And I think Nashville will be a team to look out for, not just this week, but for the rest of the season. And the last game of Saturday night is going to be the Washington Wolfpack going to face the Oregon Black Bears in Oregon. They just had a preseason game last night, which Oregon won. It was a pretty low scoring game. I do have a little bit of beef with Oregon's venue. They're playing at a state fairground, they're basically playing at a repurposed rodeo venue. And based on the pictures that I've seen from the venue when they have stuff set up for the football game, the ceilings are very, very low. I'm not sure how they're going to fit the rebounding nets in there. It doesn't look great. The walls that they had set up for the preseason game were basically cattle walls for like that you see around a typical rodeo, where it's just like metal bars and metal frames with a little bit of padding on top. Not like the hockey walls that most arenas use that they put the padding on top of. It's just a very weird layout, a very weird setup. Kickoffs and field goals are probably going to be a nightmare for teams in Oregon and Oregon. So that's going to be something I want to keep an eye on and see how that works out, see how that shakes out. But Oregon, I think on paper, has a little bit better of a team than Washington. So again, the home teams are all going to have the advantage starting off here. And I think this game with Washington and Oregon is no exception. Then on Sunday, the first game at 1 p.m., Georgia Force at the West Texas Desert Hawks. I think the home team again has an advantage here. Georgia Force, they've been a little bit of a dumpster fire this past offseason with a lot of unknowns. It's still up in the air if they're even going to play a home game this year. It's been they are, then they aren't, then they are. So they're a mess. But I think West Texas as a whole has a better infrastructure. They have a better coaching staff in place in terms of experience. Their current coach used to be the NAL commissioner for the past, I think, 8 or 9 years, and was a very successful coach before that. So tons of experience as a coach and as a leader in the arena game. So I think you have to give the advantage to West Texas here. Again, the home teams are all going to have an advantage. And then last but not least, we've got the Southwest Kansas Storm at the Salina Liberty. Both teams have played some preseason games, so both teams are going to have some reps. I honestly don't know where to lean with this one. The betting brain in me says to pick the away team just because I've already favored all the home teams, but the common sense logic brain in me says just pick all the home teams. Like, don't overthink this. So this one's gonna be pretty interesting because it is two teams that have already been established from lower tier arena leagues that got the call up or the bump up to the AFL for AFL 3.0. So this will be super interesting to see how these teams adjust and if they have their built-in fan bases from the past couple of years, how those will A, stick around, and B, continue to grow within their communities. But I would imagine, you know what, I'm making an executive decision here. I'm picking one away team, and it's going to be Southwest Kansas. for this specific game. So I think all the home teams in the AFL had the advantage in week one. I think if any away teams are going to be shaking things up and potentially pulling away with a W. Southwest Kansas against Salina. Minnesota could potentially get a little feisty against Nashville, even though I really like Nashville. Maybe Philadelphia against Louisiana, just because both teams are a little bit of a mess. So it's a matter of who's less of a mess in that particular game. So it's going to be a super interesting slate of games overall, and I think we're going to see a lot of low scoring games as a whole. And I think as the season progresses, you'll see more and more high scoring affairs. But as it stands right now, I think we're going to see a lot of ugly football. And it may turn off some folks initially, but I think it will get better as the season goes on, as the players get more reps, as real time reps, I should say, and they get more comfortable with the rules, and the coaches get into a groove with everything. But yeah, this first weekend will be very, very interesting. And that's the show. That's all we've got for today. So again, huge weekend of indoor and arena football coming up, with a full slate of IFL games and a full slate of AFL games for the first time in years, where we have a full slate for both leagues. So it's going to be a super interesting weekend. Lots of football. So go ahead and park it, get comfortable in your favorite couch spot, in your favorite recliner, and turn on the games. And can't wait to hear your thoughts. Share your thoughts with me as you're watching them live. Tweet me, post me. I don't know what the official terminology is anymore for Twitter/X, but Instagram, Twitter/X, TikTok, all that fun stuff at Off the Wall FB, F as in foot, B as in ball. There's only 24 hours in a day, and the fact that you chose to spend roughly an hour, I don't know if this is going to be more or less, of that day with me, watching, listening, means a lot. So I truly appreciate it. Like, subscribe, all that stuff, all that garbage. Yeah, I'm super excited for the week ahead, and we'll see how things shake out with the rebirth of the AFL, and IFL keeps trucking along. So take care. Have a great rest of your week. See you next time. Bye.